Welcome back, everybody. We are going to be beginning our Glaze series. It's going to be 3 to a 4-part series released weekly, and we're going to cover how to get your pieces from the bisque to the glaze to fired and be finished to take home. So something that you want to see, stick around and find out how we do it. In this week's video, we are going to be covering how to get your pieces prepped by wiping and waxing the bottom, and talking about glaze flaws and what can happen if you don't prep it nicely. In part 2, we are going to be actually dipping our pieces, and I'll talk about processes that I like to do in my own pieces and how to clean up the bottoms. In part 3, we are going to talk about how we put it into the kiln, talk a little about loading the kiln and things that I like to do when I do that. And we're going to also clean the bottom by sanding it. And then in part 4, if there's a part 4, there might be something else. Who knows? We're going to find out as I film the videos. So let's get this away and start by prepping our pieces to get it ready to glaze. So here are the cups that we are going to glaze, and I'm going to go over the glazing process in depth. And so the general steps of glazing, number 1 is you locate your piece from wherever it's been stored, and you gently wipe the exterior and interior with a damp sponge or rinse it in the sink. Number 2 is you prepare the bottom by applying wax. This is optional, but I do recommend it. Number 3 is you glaze your piece, whether that's brushing on glaze, dipping glaze, pouring glaze, whatever it may be. Number 4 is wiping down the bottom. And number 5 is putting it in the kiln. So those are the general steps, and we'll break them down into more detail as this video progresses. So the first step that we're going to be doing is getting these clean. So let's get this aside and let's get these wiped and ready for the next step. All right, so for the first thing that you want to do is after you get your piece out of the kiln, this is Bisqueware. It's no longer clay. It has transformed into now something called ceramic. And Bisqueware, you can tell by clicking it, it rings, and if you put your tongue on it, if you want to lick it, which you may want to try, your tongue actually gets stuck because this now is like a sponge. It is very porous, and when you put water on it, it gets absorbed into the body of the ceramic, and then it will dry out eventually. So when you apply glaze, the glaze goes on top, the water gets sucked in, and what's left behind is the glaze. Usually it's a dusty texture if you were to touch it. And so the first thing that we want to do is wipe away any dust that may be left from the kiln firing, or if it was sitting on a shelf for a long time, wipe away that dust. Now, there are some opposing thoughts that wiping doesn't really do anything and you don't need to do it, but for peace of mind, I still wipe my pieces down. And then there's 2 main ways that I recommend to wipe. Number 1 is you use a damp sponge and you gently just wipe the surface, not too wet. Or number 2, if you're having a lot of pieces and you don't want to wipe them because it takes time, you just rinse these in the sink like you're washing dishes, and then you set them out to dry. Now, if you do the rinsing in the sink, I do recommend you wait 24 hours to reglaze because like I said, this is a sponge. If you rinse in the sink, it absorbs water, and then if you try to glaze it, it won't absorb as much of the glaze as it would normally would if it was completely dry. So I have my container of water here. I got my sponge, and we're going to just quickly wipe these and then get it prepped for the next step, which will be waxing. All right, so you just take your piece, dip it in the water, and then you're just gently swiping the surface just to remove any dust that may be on it. Now, I actually am testing out a new point of view camera I'm wearing it around my neck, if you can see it here, to try a different view. So in the comments, let me know how you like this new point of view. I will still do the overhead cam too, but I just wanted to do a different one, especially for glazing, because there's a lot of movements. It'll be easier to see what I'm doing with the point of view. But anyway, you're just taking your sponge and gently wiping, and you're not wiping it to get it super wet. You're just wiping the surface to remove anything that may be on it. And the benefit of wiping it is if you wipe it and you don't oversaturate it, you can glaze these the same day you wipe. But like I said, if you rinse it in the sink and they're fully wet, it's best to wait 24 hours because it's just waterlogged. All right, so let's get it wiped. There's some dust in there you can kind of see. So get that wiped away. And this is now ready to get the bottom waxed. Before we wax the bottom, we quickly want to go over why we need to wax it. So when you fire pieces in the kiln, you can never have any glaze on the bottom because the glaze that's on the piece will melt, turn into molten glass, and it will fuse to whatever it touches. So if this is fired in the kiln and my hand is the kiln shelf and there's glaze on the bottom, this now will get stuck to the kiln. And so in order to prevent that from happening, you have to remove all the glaze from the bottom. So if you don't wax the bottom, you have to wipe all the glaze off with, you guessed it, a sponge. Now that wastes glaze and extra time in terms of wiping. So what some people do, and I recommend, especially for all my students, and my own pieces I do the same, is I wax the entire foot from wall to wall, because I don't want to have to wipe as much of the glaze off. Now some people, they only wax the bottom here so that they have glaze all the way across the bottom of their foot and the clay wall. Some people don't even wax because all they do is get a sponge and wipe the bottom, and that's fine if you know your glaze doesn't run. But one thing about glazes, if you apply too much glaze to the surface, too much glaze will cause it to melt and it'll go down because gravity will pull that molten glass down, and then it can run off your piece onto the kiln shelf. So I will do a later episode about really deep diving into all that stuff, but just to kind of tell you and show you what I mean, I'm going to clear this area and I have some test pieces to show you what running glaze looks like, and I have some pictures also. One of the reasons why I haven't really done a glaze video is because glazing, there's so many things that can go wrong. There's so many flaws that can happen that it can be in its own entire video by itself. But I just quickly want to go over some of the most common glaze flaws, which is glaze running. And so in my class and in a lot of the studios that I teach at, they fire and we fire pieces on something called a cookie, which is just a ceramic piece with something called kiln wash on top of it. And I can do a deep dive into all this stuff later if you guys want to know. So let me know in the comments if you want me to deep dive on all this. But kiln wash is just a protective layer you put on the kiln shelf so that if your piece gets stuck, you can easily pop it off. We kiln wash the shelves and I kiln wash the cookie so that we can pop the cookie from the piece if it gets stuck. And so in an ideal world, your piece will not get stuck, it'll get released and you can use it as soon as you wash it. But if you apply too much glaze, what might happen is it runs off your piece and then gets stuck to whatever it touches. In this case, I had a cookie saved my kiln shelf. Now some of the glaze got stuck to the kiln shelf and it was just little globs, and that was easy to chip off and then reapply the kiln wash. But now this piece is an example to all my students of what happens if you apply too much glaze. And so you can see the glaze is beautiful, but it just ran. It was just too much. So whenever you dip and apply glazes, there's a correct amount of time to submerge the pieces in, and there's a correct amount of brush strokes to apply to avoid this. And we'll go over that as we jump into the whole glazing aspect. So you can kind of see beautiful mug, lovely texture, lovely glaze, but just too much. Now you can remove this and grind everything off, but that can be done for another video. And so what happens, here's another example of a beautiful glaze piece, but just too much. So if you can release the cookie, you pop it off, and what usually happens is glaze and part of the clay gets removed and stuck to the cookie. And then what you're left with is just a really sharp piece. Now this is all glass on here. This is glass that can cut your finger. So you gotta be very careful when you touch this. You'd have to sand or grind this smooth if you wanna use this. So usually most pieces you have to scrap, but there is a way to fix it, and I can kind of go over that later. Now the reason why I fire on cookies is to protect the kiln shelves, because kiln shelves are expensive. And so now this cookie took most of the damage. Some of the kiln wash from the shelf got pulled off, but the glaze didn't get stuck. It got stuck to here. So I saved the kiln shelf by using a cookie, and I highly recommend everyone fire pieces on cookies because it does save you a lot of time and headache, especially if you're in a public studio for all your teachers or working with a lot of different people of different skill levels. Cookies are essential. And another issue that you may encounter is if you apply your glaze too thick, the glaze can crack and ultimately peel off. The pictures on the left show some light cracks, and as long as the cracks are not too deep, you can fire it without too many issues occurring. But if the cracks are a little deeper, like this piece here, when it's fired, the glaze may crawl away and leave naked spots like this. And as you move on to the pictures to the right, the top right is starting to lift up and peel away, and the bottom right is the extreme where that is done. There's no saving. You have to wash it, take off all the glaze, and reapply. And usually that happens when you overlap glazes. There are a bunch of other flaws that we can talk about later, but we want to prep our pieces so that glaze cannot stick to the bottom. So to protect the bottom of your piece from glaze, we use something called wax. And you brush this onto the bottom of your piece to prevent glaze from sticking to it. So this is basically a waterproofer. Now there's a lot of different uses for wax. You can put it directly on the clay, you can put it on your glaze, you can put it on your raw clay, but there's so many uses. But the main use we use this in this classroom is protecting the bottom. So before I start waxing, a few things to know about the wax is make sure that you always keep it covered when you're not in use. This will harden into a gum-like solution when it's exposed to oxygen, and it's very sticky, and whatever it touches, it will stick to that surface. It will stick to your hand, it will stick to your clay, and the only way to remove wax from a clay piece is you either have to fire it to burn the wax off in the kiln, or you have to sand it with sandpaper to remove it. You can't scratch it with a needle, you can't use a lighter to heat it up. I tried, it doesn't work. It might be better for you, but sanding it is the most efficient, and sanding always creates dust. So if you have to sand it, do it outside, wear a protective N95 or better mask, and make sure you wipe the surface after to remove the dust. If you can wet sand, even better. Get a wet sanding block, sand it while it's under the water. So safe, it doesn't create dust, and just let your piece dry for 24 hours. To use it, you take your piece, you get a brush, preferably a brush that you don't really care about because the wax can make it really messy, and then you just brush it on. Now, when I brush from the edge of the foot all the way across to the other edge because I like having a naked foot, especially if it runs, the foot will protect it. Like I said before, some people just like waxing just the edge, and some people wax just the foot from edge to edge. So I'll show you the different ways, and then I'll show you the way that I like. Okay, so I highly recommend you wax on a wheel because you can just spin the wheel, and like trimming, you just apply pressure where you want the wax to go. And so what I'm going to do is something called tap centering, which you may have seen in a previous video. And I want to center this to make sure that when I apply the wax, it's centered to the piece. So I just spin the wheel, my left finger goes on top, and I just tap the piece every time it gets close to my right hand. So I'll push it off center so you can see the process. Every time it touches my right hand, I tap, or gets close to my right hand. And then as it gets closer to center, I tap a little lighter. So right there, centered. And so the bare minimum of waxing, if you never waxed before. Oh, and when you get your wax, I do recommend you just kind of swirl it. And this wax is from a shop called The Ceramic Shop. And if you're watching The Ceramic Shop, I would love to work with you folks. But anyway, we buy a lot of products from them for our classroom, and this one's called Wax Off. And I love this wax because it works really well, it dries hard, it works really well in glaze, and it resists really nicely. And with all waxes, I usually water it down. So I use about 1 part water to 2 parts wax to get a nice flowing wax. And when you use it, I do recommend watering it down a little bit, but the amount that you need to water is based on your own experience. And so anyway, I give it a little swirl because it is watered down. And the bare minimum to wax is at least, if you are going to wax, the bottom of the foot, because you cannot have any glaze touch the bottom. Okay? That's the bare minimum. Now, some other students, they want to wax a little more because they know their glaze is going to run. So if you are going to wax a little more, I recommend waxing the inside of your foot until it touches the base where you trimmed, and then the outside of your foot where it touches your clay wall. That is the next amount I recommend. But for me, I don't like having to wipe and clean anything. So I just wax the entire middle and all the way out. And especially because I want my stamp to show, it will get covered in glaze if it's not waxed. So I want to wax everything. And this makes cleanup a little easier for me, for my process. And whatever amount you wax is up to you. But for my students, I recommend them wax at least this much. So you wax every piece that you need, and then it takes anywhere from 5 minutes to 20 minutes to dry, depending on how much you put. And you only need to put one thin layer. The smoother and the less textured it is, the better it will resist the glaze when you dip it. And we're going to be dipping these pieces. So I'm going to be going ahead and waxing all my pieces. So same thing, put it close to center, tap center, and then apply the wax. Now you don't need to tap center, you can push center, but tap centering does save you a lot of time. And it's a great technique to learn, especially when you start trimming your pieces, because it will speed up the whole trimming process. Okay, and this part's a little awkward for me because I am left-handed and I like holding this in my left hand. However, the way the wheel's spinning, it's better to hold it in the right hand because I don't want this wax going beyond the bottom of my foot. And then sometimes little bubbles are left, so I like to smooth that out. So take all that extra wax off. And then I'm just going to keep going until all my pieces are waxed, so then I can move on to the next step. Now, if your pieces are flat, you want to make sure that you wax the entire flat bottom. And then I have this beveled edge that I created. I'm going to wax up to that. But flat pieces, you wax the entire flat bottom, and then you can either wax down the edge about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, or you can save that for wiping it with a sponge. And so for my students, I usually just have them wax the entire flat bottom. In this case, that would be up to here. And then I'll have them use the sponge to wipe the rest. But because I have it on the wheel, I can wax a nice clean edge like this, about 1/8 of an inch down. Okay, that looks good. And if I wanted, I could wax the entire bevel, but it's going to look a little weird if that much glaze is naked, at least for my clay. All right, I'm almost done with all the pieces. So this prep does take a little while, but it's something that I recommend because it does save you time at the end when you have to clean your pieces. If you want to see more ceramic videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. That way it helps grow the channel and you'll be able to see these videos as they're released every week. You can also wax it by hand if you want without the wheel, but I prefer the wheel because the wheel does all the work for me. It spins and I just hold the wax brush. All right, last piece. And sometimes tap centering can't get it perfectly centered, so then push centering might be required. Oh, and then one thing I forgot to mention, when you wax, if you have a name or engraving on the bottom, make sure you fill that completely with wax because sometimes when you glaze, the glaze loves to fill any crevice. So if you have a deep crevice, like your name carving, and you don't wax it well, the glaze will fill it, and you're gonna have to spend more time to dig it out if you don't want to see it there. All right, there we go. Last piece waxed. All right, now that I'm done with my wax, just like I said in the beginning of the video, keep it covered when you're done so it doesn't harden. And the wax brush, you have to wash this with soap and water in order to get the wax off. So I rinse it with water first, then I pump soap into my palm, and I massage it into the bristles to get rid of any of the stickiness, massage the metal part, and then I rinse it clean. And then I can use this again if I need it. I have dedicated wax brushes in my class. I label them with red tape for the students so that they know this is for wax. And if these get destroyed, it's not the worst because these are not my best brushes. Thank you for watching part 1 of this 3, maybe 4-part series. And you might be a little confused because these look different than what you saw in the video. This is what it's going to look like at the end of part 2. And we're going to dive into mixing the glaze, pouring the glaze, dipping the glaze, and then cleaning up the bottoms of your piece. So if that's something that you want to see, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can see part 2 get released when I premiere it. And I hope you learned something new about cleaning your pieces and getting it prepped for the actual glazing process. So until then, as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.